I should have known my marriage was already over the moment my sister smiled and said, "Some people simply have a price." At the time, everyone around the table laughed as if she'd just made another one of her sharp little jokes. I laughed too, not because it was funny, but because I had spent my entire life pretending comments like that didn't hurt anymore. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 36 years old, a financial compliance manager in Chicago, and I believe numbers always told the truth. People, however, were far more complicated. The moment that changed everything didn't happen in a courtroom or during a dramatic confrontation. It began with a notification on my phone while I was reviewing quarterly audit reports in my office. My banking app flashed across the screen because Ryan and I still shared access to one investment account. Normally, I ignored routine transfers. That afternoon, one transaction froze me in place. $75,500 had been deposited into Ryan's private account. The sender's name wasn't hidden. Victoria Brooks, my older sister. I stared at the screen so long that it dimmed before my eyes. I unlocked it again, hoping I had misread the numbers. I hadn't. The amount remained exactly the same. $75,500. I wasn't confused because my sister had money. Victoria had always done well in real estate. I was confused because she had absolutely no reason to send that kind of money to my husband without telling me. Before I could even process it, another notification appeared. Ryan had texted me, "I'm sorry. This is how things have to happen." That was all. No explanation. No apology worth believing. No request to talk. Just 12 words that somehow erased 12 years of marriage. I called him immediately, straight to voicemail. I called again. The same result. I texted Victoria. She didn't answer either. For nearly an hour I sat in complete silence, listening to the soft hum of the office air conditioner while coworkers continued their meetings outside my glass office. Everything around me looked perfectly normal. My entire life suddenly wasn't. About 90 minutes later, my mother called. Her voice sounded strangely cheerful. "Honey, don't make this harder than it has to be." I blinked slowly. "What are you talking about?" There was a brief pause before she sighed. "Victoria and Ryan are together now. Sometimes people fall in love. You should try to be mature about it." Mature. That word followed me throughout my childhood. Be mature when Victoria borrowed my clothes without asking. Be mature when she announced my achievements were never as impressive as hers. Be mature when holidays revolved entirely around her schedule. Somehow being mature always meant accepting less. I asked quietly, "Did you know?" Another pause. "Your father and I thought it was better if you found out naturally." Naturally. As though discovering my husband had disappeared with my own sister was something that happened every day. I ended the call before I said something I'd regret. I didn't cry. Surprisingly, I couldn't. Instead, I opened the banking record again and enlarged every detail of the transfer. Date, time, amount, reference number. My professional instincts took over before my emotions could. Years of investigating financial irregularities had trained me to preserve evidence before asking questions. I saved screenshots, downloaded transaction logs, archived account histories. Every movement left a trail. Every trail eventually reached the truth. Late that evening, social media finished telling the rest of the story. Victoria uploaded a photograph. Ryan stood beside her with one arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling beneath warm restaurant lights. The caption read, "Sometimes happiness costs more than people understand. Worth every penny." Thousands of strangers would probably assume she was talking about expensive champagne or an engagement ring. I knew exactly what she meant. Beneath the photo, relatives flooded the comments with congratulations, heart emojis, and declarations about true love finding its way. My father commented first. "Proud of both of you." I stared at those 4 words longer than I stared at the bank transfer. Then I smiled. Not because my heart wasn't breaking, but because something inside me became perfectly still. For the first time all day, I stopped wondering why they had done it. Instead, I found myself asking a completely different question. What exactly had my sister just paid $75,500 to buy? The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, not because I had slept well, but because I hadn't slept at all. The silence inside my townhouse felt unfamiliar. For 12 years, Ryan's coffee grinder had been my alarm clock. Every weekday at exactly 6:15, I'd hear the beans grinding downstairs while he hummed whatever song happened to be stuck in his head. That morning there was nothing. No footsteps, no humming, no coffee, just silence and the dull glow of my phone on the nightstand. Overnight, dozens of new notifications had arrived. Most were from relatives. None of them asked how I was doing. Instead, they wanted me to be understanding, avoid making the family choose sides, or my personal favorite, true love shouldn't be punished. I almost laughed. Apparently, I had become the villain simply because my husband had left me for my own sister. I closed every message without replying. Years ago, I would have defended myself. I would have written long explanations, hoping someone would finally understand my side. Experience had taught me otherwise. People who wanted the truth usually asked questions. People who had already chosen a side only looked for confirmation. My family had never struggled with choosing sides. Victoria had always been their favorite. She was 4 years older than me, louder than me, prettier according to every aunt I had ever met, and somehow every selfish decision she made was rebranded as confidence. When we were children, she took my birthday gifts because she liked them better. My parents called it sharing. When we became teenagers, she borrowed my clothes without asking and returned them stained or stretched. My mother said sisters shouldn't argue over little things. When I graduated first in my finance program, my father spent dinner talking about Victoria's newest real estate listing because she needed encouragement more. Every accomplishment I earned quietly became another opportunity to celebrate someone else. I eventually stopped expecting fairness. It was simply easier. Ryan had seemed different. He listened. He admired how organized I was. He used to tell me that my calmness made him feel safe. Looking back, I realized something uncomfortable. He had also admired how easy it was for me to forgive people. At the time, I believed forgiveness was strength. Now I wondered if I had simply made myself convenient. Around 9 o'clock, I drove to our downtown condominium. Ryan's SUV wasn't in the garage. The concierge recognized me immediately and gave me an awkward smile before looking away. News traveled quickly inside expensive buildings. I unlocked the apartment and stepped inside. Half of Ryan's clothes were gone. So were his golf clubs, expensive watches, and the framed wedding photograph that had once sat above the fireplace. He hadn't left in a rush. He had planned every detail. I walked slowly from room to room, noticing the empty spaces more than the furniture that remained. It was strange how absence could become visible. A missing jacket, an empty drawer, a blank spot on the closet shelf. Every gap quietly announced that someone had chosen another life. On the kitchen island, I found an envelope addressed to me in Ryan's handwriting. Inside was a single page. "Emily, I know you'll eventually understand. Victoria and I didn't expect this to happen, but life changes. She offered me a future I couldn't ignore. Please don't make things difficult. You deserve someone who truly appreciates you." I read it twice, not because I believed it, but because I wanted to understand how someone could reduce 12 years of marriage to 6 polite sentences. He never mentioned love. He never mentioned regret. He never denied the money. He only mentioned a future. That word stayed with me. A future purchased with exactly $75,500. Before leaving the apartment, I opened my laptop and logged into every financial account we had shared. Years of compliance work had taught me one rule above all others. Whenever something appeared simple, there was usually another layer beneath it. Transfers, contracts, ownership records, insurance policies, beneficiary designations, tax filings, every decision left evidence somewhere. While everyone else was celebrating a romance, I had begun examining a transaction. And in my profession, transactions almost always revealed motives far more honestly than promises ever could. By Friday afternoon, my family had turned betrayal into a celebration. I found out the same way everyone else did, through a group text titled "A New Beginning." Victoria had created it years ago to organize holiday dinners and birthdays. Now she was using it to announce that she and Ryan would be hosting an engagement dinner the following evening. My name was still included in the conversation. Apparently, no one thought removing the ex-wife was necessary. My mother replied first with heart emojis. My father wrote, "Life is too short to ignore happiness." My Aunt Karen added, "Everything happens for a reason." Then came dozens of messages congratulating the happy couple, as though they had just overcome incredible obstacles instead of creating them. I never answered. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Victoria. I let it ring twice before accepting the call. "Emily," she said brightly. "I was hoping you'd pick up." Her voice carried the same confidence it always had. The confidence of someone who had never heard the word no from our parents. "I did," I replied. "Good. I wanted you to hear this from me instead of anyone else." I almost smiled. That opportunity had disappeared nearly 24 hours earlier. "Ryan and I are getting married as soon as the divorce paperwork is finalized." She paused, waiting for an emotional reaction that never came. "Congratulations," I answered. Silence filled the line for several seconds. I imagined her frowning. Victoria never knew what to do when people refused to perform the role she had written for them. "That's all you have to say?" she finally asked. "What were you expecting?" "I don't know." Anger. Questions. Maybe an apology from me. Would it be sincere? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she laughed softly. "You're still the practical one." Then her tone changed. "Emily, I know you probably saw the transfer." There it was. She wasn't even pretending anymore. "Yes," I said. $75,500. Think of it as an investment." I looked out the window of my office at the traffic crawling below. An investment in what? A better future. Her confidence was remarkable. "Ryan wasn't happy with you. He just didn't know how to leave." I remained quiet. She continued speaking because silence often encouraged people to reveal more than they intended. "He deserves someone who believes in bigger dreams. I helped him see that." "Did you?" "Absolutely." Another pause. Then she added the sentence that would stay with me forever. "Everyone has a price, Emily. I simply happen to know Ryan's." She disconnected before I could reply. I lowered the phone and replayed every word in my head. Not because I was heartbroken anymore, but because I had just been handed something far more valuable than an insult. She had admitted the payment herself. No lawyer would call it a confession, but it revealed how she viewed the entire situation. To Victoria, people weren't partners. They were assets, opportunities, purchases. That afternoon, Ryan finally responded to one of my messages. "Can we meet?" he wrote. "I think we should keep this civil." We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe near the river. He arrived wearing the navy blazer I had bought him for our 10th anniversary. Somehow that bothered me more than seeing him. He looked nervous but not guilty. There was a difference. "Emily," he began, "I never wanted to hurt you." I stirred my coffee without looking at him. "Yet somehow you managed." He sighed. Victoria made me realize I'd settled. I nodded slowly. "Did she also make you realize $75,500 would help?" His face changed for less than a second. It was barely noticeable, but years spent interviewing employees during financial investigations had trained me to recognize micro-expressions. Surprise, then calculation. "What money?" he asked. I looked directly into his eyes. "Wrong answer." He recovered quickly. "You're imagining things." I stood, placed a $20 bill on the table for the untouched coffee, and picked up my purse. "Goodbye, Ryan." "That's it?" he asked. "You're just walking away?" I smiled politely. "No, I'm simply finished asking questions whose answers I already know." As I walked toward the exit, I realized something that made my heartbeat unexpectedly steady. Ryan had lied. Victoria had admitted the payment. Two people involved in the same transaction were already telling different stories. In my profession, contradictions were rarely accidents. They were usually the first visible crack before an entire structure collapsed. Most people think revenge begins with anger. Mine began with an appointment on Monday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. Daniel Harper's law office occupied the 23rd floor of a quiet building overlooking the Chicago River. I had met him 3 years earlier during a corporate fraud investigation, where his attention to detail impressed me almost as much as his refusal to make assumptions. When his assistant led me into the conference room, Daniel looked up from a stack of documents and immediately noticed the envelope in my hands. "You brought evidence," he said. "I brought questions," I corrected. "Evidence is just easier to organize." He smiled faintly. "Tell me everything." For nearly an hour, I walked him through every event since the bank transfer appeared on my phone. The payment, Ryan's disappearance, Victoria's phone call, the social media announcement, Ryan's denial. I handed him screenshots, account records, timestamps, and printed copies of every text message. He didn't interrupt. He simply listened while making careful notes. When I finished, he folded his hands together. "Before we discuss your divorce," he said, "I want to ask something unusual." "Go ahead. Has your husband always handled your family's finances?" I frowned. "No. I have." "Who prepared your tax filings?" "I did." "Who managed investments?" "I did." "Insurance policies?" "Also me." He leaned back in his chair. "Interesting." I wasn't sure what he meant. Daniel opened a legal pad and drew 2 columns. On one side he wrote assets. On the other he wrote liabilities. "People like your sister," he said calmly, "usually focus on the first column. They rarely ask enough questions about the second." I looked at the words for several seconds. "You're saying she bought something she doesn't fully understand." "I'm saying we shouldn't assume she knows what she purchased." That sentence lingered in the room. He wasn't encouraging revenge. He wasn't suggesting manipulation. He was simply pointing out a possibility that had never crossed my mind. Daniel requested copies of every financial document connected to my marriage. Fortunately, organization had always been my strongest habit. By lunchtime, my encrypted cloud folder contained 12 years of mortgage statements, tax returns, retirement accounts, insurance records, business agreements, and investment portfolios. As he reviewed them, his expression slowly changed. "Emily," he said quietly, "did Ryan ever read any of these?" I almost laughed. He signed wherever I placed the tabs. Daniel nodded as though that answer confirmed something. "And your sister?" "Victoria gets bored whenever someone mentions paperwork." I suspected as much. He turned one document toward me. It was the refinancing agreement for our condominium. Ryan's signature appeared beside mine. "Do you remember signing this?" "Of course." "Do you remember the clause attached to page 14? I didn't. Daniel slid the additional pages across the table. Buried inside the refinancing package was a personal guarantee connected to an investment property Ryan had insisted on purchasing 2 years earlier. I remembered warning him against it. The property had generated almost no income, but Ryan believed the market would eventually recover. It hadn't. Daniel tapped the figures with his pen. "Legally, these obligations remain attached unless properly reassigned." My pulse remained steady, but my mind began assembling pieces that no one else seemed to notice. Victoria had focused on Ryan. She had celebrated winning him. She had publicly declared that she had purchased a better future. But had she ever asked what financial responsibilities followed him? Had Ryan even told her? Daniel closed the folder. "I'm not suggesting anyone has done anything illegal," he said carefully. "I'm suggesting they may have been remarkably careless. Careless people often created their own disasters." I understood that better than anyone. Every fraud investigation I had ever worked started with someone believing no one would examine the paperwork. Walking out of Daniel's office, I felt lighter than I had since this nightmare began. Not because I had discovered a way to hurt my sister, but because I finally understood something important. I didn't need to build a trap. The documents already existed. The signatures already existed. The obligations already existed. All I had to do was step aside and allow the truth, buried quietly inside hundreds of pages that no one except me had ever bothered to read, to arrive exactly when it was supposed to. The engagement dinner took place exactly 1 week after Ryan walked out of our marriage. I wasn't invited officially, but that hardly mattered. My family had always believed social media was a better storyteller than a personal conversation. By 6 o'clock that evening, photographs began appearing online one after another. Victoria wore a cream-colored designer dress that looked suspiciously like a wedding gown pretending not to be one. Ryan stood beside her in a tailored charcoal suit, smiling with the confidence of a man convinced he had finally chosen the winning side. My parents stood directly behind them, raising champagne glasses toward the camera. The caption beneath the first photograph read, "Some endings are really beautiful beginnings." Hundreds of people liked it within the first hour. Many of them had attended my wedding 12 years earlier. Funny how quickly people rewrote history when a prettier version appeared. I enlarged each photograph without emotion. Years of compliance investigations had trained me to notice details others ignored. The restaurant, the guest list, the seating arrangement, the jewelry, even the timing of each upload. Information always existed inside ordinary moments if someone looked carefully enough. Around 7:30, my phone buzzed. It was my cousin Megan. Unlike the rest of the family, she rarely participated in Victoria's performances. "I thought you should know," she whispered as though someone might overhear us. "Your parents told everyone tonight that you and Ryan had been growing apart for years." I leaned back in my chair. "Anything else?" She hesitated. "Victoria told people Ryan never really loved you. She said he stayed because he felt responsible." I thanked her for calling before ending the conversation. The words didn't sting the way they probably should have. Lies lose much of their power once you stop needing approval from the people telling them. 10 minutes later, another photo appeared online. This one caught my attention immediately. Victoria had posted a close-up of Ryan slipping an engagement ring onto her finger. Her caption was shorter this time. "Worth every dollar." Most people interpreted it as another playful joke about expensive jewelry. I knew better. She was talking about the $75,500. She couldn't resist reminding herself that she had one. My phone vibrated again. This time it was Daniel Harper. "Have you seen the pictures?" he asked. "Every single one." "Good. Save them." "Already done." He laughed softly. "I was fairly certain you would." Before hanging up, he added one sentence. "People who believe they're untouchable often document their own mistakes." After the call ended, I created another encrypted folder on my laptop. Inside it, I stored every screenshot, every caption, every public comment, every timestamp. None of it proved anything illegal, but it did preserve a timeline. Timelines mattered. They exposed patterns that isolated moments tried to hide. While everyone else admired champagne glasses and diamond rings, I noticed something else. Ryan was wearing the luxury watch I had purchased for him on our 10th anniversary. The same watch had been insured under our homeowner's policy. The policy was still active. Another detail quietly joined the growing list inside my notebook. By 9 o'clock, the celebration reached its peak. My mother posted a family portrait with a caption that read, "Our family is finally complete again." I studied the image carefully. There they all were, my parents, Victoria, Ryan, my uncles, aunts, cousins, neighbors, and family friends. Every seat at the table was filled. Mine was the only one missing. Oddly enough, that photograph gave me a sense of peace I hadn't expected. For the first time, I saw the situation exactly as it was. They hadn't excluded me because I had failed. They had excluded me because I no longer fit the version of reality they wanted to sell. That realization removed the last trace of guilt I had been carrying. Near midnight, another message arrived from Ryan. "I hope someday you'll forgive us." I read it once before placing my phone face down on the table. Forgiveness was no longer the question. Accountability was. Somewhere across the city, my sister believed she had purchased the perfect future. Ryan believed he had escaped every consequence. My parents believed the story was over. None of them realized that the most important chapter had not even begun. They were celebrating a victory while standing on a foundation they had never bothered to inspect. and foundations have a habit of revealing their cracks only after everyone has started dancing. 30 hours after marrying my sister, Ryan called me for the first time without pretending everything was under control. I almost didn't answer. His name flashed across my screen while I was sitting in my office reviewing an internal compliance report. Outside my window, Chicago looked exactly as it had every other weekday. Inside my phone, however, panic had finally arrived. I let it ring twice before accepting the call. Emily. His voice sounded nothing like the confident man from the engagement photographs. It was strained, uneven, almost breathless. I need to talk to you. I closed the report on my computer. About what? A long silence followed. Then he whispered, "Something's wrong." I didn't respond immediately. People often reveal far more when silence makes them uncomfortable. Victoria, he continued. She's furious. I'm surprised. Another pause. She found the documents. I leaned back in my chair without saying a word. She didn't know, he muttered. She thought. His sentence faded before he finished it. She thought what? I asked calmly. She thought everything we owned was paid off. There it was. The first crack. Exactly as Daniel had predicted. Ryan confessed that the morning after their courthouse wedding, Victoria insisted on organizing their finances. She wanted every account combined immediately. She planned to celebrate their new financial future by shopping for a larger house together. Instead, she discovered mortgage obligations, investment guarantees, refinancing commitments, tax liabilities, and contractual responsibilities she had never imagined existed. None of them were secret. Every obligation had been properly disclosed in legally binding documents. Ryan had simply never bothered reading them. Neither had Victoria. She says you tricked us, Ryan said. I almost smiled. Did I forge your signature? No. Did I hide any documents? No. Did anyone force either of you to sign legally binding agreements? He didn't answer. He couldn't. Every document had been reviewed by attorneys. Every signature belonged to him. Every responsibility had existed long before he left me. Reality wasn't changing. His understanding of it was. Emily, he said carefully, there has to be something we can do. There is. His breathing slowed slightly, hopeful. Read contracts before signing them. He let out an exhausted sigh. Please don't do this. I'm not doing anything, Ryan. And it was the truth. I hadn't filed new claims. I hadn't contacted creditors. I hadn't exposed them publicly. I hadn't even spoken to Victoria since her engagement dinner. Their crisis wasn't something I created. It was simply the moment fantasy collided with paperwork. Before he could continue, another voice exploded through the phone. Even from several feet away, I recognized Victoria instantly. "Give me the phone," she shouted. More muffled arguing followed before she seized it. Emily, her voice shook with anger. You knew. Knew what? All those debts. Obligations, I corrected. They're called obligations. You let Ryan marry me without telling me. I wasn't invited into your marriage. She practically screamed. You're enjoying this. I looked at the skyline outside my office. No, Victoria. I'm simply listening. She accused me of hiding information, sabotaging their future, and intentionally embarrassing her. The accusations continued for nearly 2 minutes before I interrupted with a single question. Did you ever ask Ryan to show you his financial records before you married him? Silence. Did you ask your attorney to review his obligations? More silence. Did you believe buying my husband automatically erased everything attached to his name? She hung up without answering. I placed my phone on the desk and slowly exhaled. 30 hours. That was all it had taken. 30 hours for the fantasy to collapse under the weight of reality. Daniel called later that afternoon. Apparently Ryan had already contacted 2 different law firms searching for options. Daniel's voice remained as calm as ever. As expected, he said. The honeymoon ended faster than most vacations. They're blaming me. Of course they are. Accountability is difficult for people who mistake confidence for competence. I smiled for the first time in days. Across town, my sister had believed $75,500 had purchased the perfect husband, the perfect future, and the perfect victory. Instead, she had inherited exactly what had always existed. A man who signed papers he never read, avoided responsibility whenever possible, and assumed someone else would eventually solve every problem. She hadn't bought a dream. She had simply paid a premium price for the truth I had been living with for years. The story my family had spent days creating began falling apart before the weekend was over. Nobody announced it publicly, of course. Families like mine never admitted mistakes. They simply stopped talking about the things that had embarrassed them. The endless engagement photographs disappeared. Victoria stopped posting inspirational quotes about destiny. My mother's daily updates suddenly shifted to recipes and flower arrangements. Silence replaced celebration, and silence usually meant damage control. I first heard the details from Megan. She called while I was grocery shopping on Saturday morning. "You won't believe what's happening," she whispered. "Try me. They've been fighting since Thursday." I reached for a carton of milk without changing my expression. "About money? About everything." Megan lowered her voice even further. Apparently Victoria thought Ryan had hidden assets. Instead, she found payment schedules, investment losses, refinancing obligations, and a stack of legal documents she doesn't understand. I thanked her before ending the call. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was recognition. I had lived inside that confusion for years. The difference was that I had chosen to understand it instead of pretending it didn't exist. Later that afternoon, Daniel invited me to his office. He placed a folder on the conference table but didn't open it immediately. "You remember what I told you?" he asked. "About people focusing on assets instead of liabilities." He nodded. "There's something else." He slid a single document toward me. It was one of the investment agreements Ryan and I had signed years earlier. "Look at paragraph 12. I read it carefully. Then I read it again. A transfer of interest clause. If ownership of certain shared financial interests changed because of divorce or remarriage, additional disclosures and refinancing requirements could be triggered under the lending agreement. I looked up. "They don't know this exists." Daniel smiled politely. Neither of them asked. "Will the lender enforce it?" "They usually do." I sat quietly for several moments. The clause wasn't hidden. It wasn't misleading. It had simply never mattered because Ryan had never imagined leaving me under these circumstances. Now it mattered very much. "Should I warn them?" I finally asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. "Did anyone warn you before your husband accepted $75,500? I looked back down at the document. "No." "Then perhaps everyone involved should begin accepting responsibility for the agreements they willingly entered." On Monday morning, that responsibility arrived. Ryan left 3 voicemails before noon. I listened to all of them without returning the calls. The first sounded hopeful. The second sounded anxious. The third sounded desperate. "Emily, please call me. This isn't what I thought would happen. Victoria says the bank is requesting additional documentation. Her attorney says, just please call me." I archived every voicemail. At 2 o'clock, Victoria texted me for the first time since accusing me of sabotage. "We need to meet." I replied with 3 words. "Regarding what?" Her answer came instantly. "You know exactly what." I set the phone aside and returned to work. 20 minutes later, another message appeared. "Please." It struck me how quickly confidence had transformed into urgency. Only a few days earlier, she had proudly declared that everyone had a price. Now she was asking for my time without offering anything in return. That evening, I stopped by the townhouse to collect the last of Ryan's remaining belongings. Most of it was ordinary old books, winter coats, framed college photographs. In the back of the bedroom closet sat a dusty cardboard box I had almost forgotten. Inside were notebooks from the first years of our marriage. Budget plans, savings goals, vacation ideas, retirement projections. Ryan's handwriting filled the margins beside mine. "We'll build this together," one note read. I closed the notebook gently. For a brief moment, I remembered the man I thought I had married. Maybe he had existed once. Or maybe I had simply mistaken potential for character. Either way, he was gone long before my sister transferred the money. As I carried the box downstairs, my phone vibrated again. Another message from Victoria. Only 4 words this time. Please help us, Emily. I stared at the screen for several seconds before locking the phone and slipping it back into my purse. She still didn't understand. She believed I possessed the power to rescue the future she had purchased. The truth was far simpler. I wasn't holding their future in my hands. They had signed it themselves, page by page, long before they ever realized the cost. The first time my parents came to my office together, I knew the performance had entered its final act. My assistant called to say 2 visitors were insisting they didn't need an appointment because they were family. I almost laughed. Family had been a convenient word whenever someone wanted something from me. Send them in, I said. My mother entered first, clutching her handbag with both hands. My father followed behind her, looking older than I remembered. Neither of them smiled. They sat across from my desk without speaking for several seconds. Finally, my mother broke the silence. Emily, she said softly, your sister made a mistake. I folded my hands together. Which one? She blinked. This isn't the time for sarcasm. It wasn't sarcasm. I was asking which mistake we're discussing. My father cleared his throat. Things have become complicated. I waited. He had spent my entire childhood expecting everyone else to fill uncomfortable silences for him. This time, I let the silence stay exactly where it belonged. Ryan and Victoria are having financial problems, he admitted. I know. Both of them looked surprised. You knew? My mother asked. Ryan called me. Victoria texted me. My father leaned forward. Then you also know you could fix this. There it was. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement of what they had done. A request. They still believed my role in the family was solving problems other people created. How exactly would I fix it? I asked. Talk to the bank. Explain the situation. Delay whatever paperwork is happening. I shook my head slowly. Banks don't work that way. You know people. No. I know contracts. My mother's eyes filled with frustration. Emily, this is your sister. I looked at her carefully before answering. Yes, the same sister who announced she bought my husband. Neither of them spoke. The same sister who celebrated while my marriage collapsed. Still nothing. The same sister who told everyone Ryan never loved me. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. She said things she shouldn't have. And, he hesitated. She regrets them. I noticed something missing. Not once had either of them used the word sorry. Regret was about consequences. An apology was about responsibility. They weren't the same thing. My mother reached across the desk, but I didn't move. Emily, families forgive each other. A memory surfaced without warning. I was 12 years old, standing in our kitchen after Victoria had broken my camera during an argument. It had been the first expensive thing I ever bought with money from babysitting. My mother hugged Victoria because she felt guilty for losing her temper. Then she turned to me and said, "You're the mature one. Forgive your sister." I remembered crying in my bedroom while Victoria laughed downstairs. That wasn't forgiveness. It was surrender disguised as kindness. I returned to the present and met my mother's eyes. "Do you remember my camera?" Her expression changed instantly. She remembered. That was years ago. It was the first time I learned that keeping peace in this family always meant sacrificing something that belonged to me. Neither of them denied it. They couldn't. It had happened too many times. The broken camera. The college savings my parents borrowed to help Victoria after another failed business idea. The holidays rearranged around her schedule. The constant expectation that I would understand because I was stronger. My father sighed deeply. "We made mistakes. You made choices," I corrected. Repeatedly. He lowered his eyes. For the first time in my life, I saw something I had never expected from him. Shame. Not because I had finally spoken the truth, but because he realized I no longer needed his approval. My mother stood slowly. "So that's it?" she asked quietly. "You're going to let your sister lose everything?" I remained calm. I didn't take anything from her. She opened her mouth to argue before stopping herself. Because she knew I was right. Victoria had chosen Ryan. Ryan had signed every agreement. They had created every obligation together. The consequences belonged to them. My parents walked toward the door without another word. Just before leaving, my father turned back. "You've changed, Emily." I looked at him for a moment before answering. "No," I said. "I've simply stopped paying for other people's decisions. And that has made all the difference." 3 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new condominium overlooking Lake Michigan with a cup of coffee in my hands and a silence I had spent years earning. The divorce had been finalized without drama. Every asset had been divided according to the law. Every obligation had remained attached to the signatures that created it. Justice, I had learned, was rarely loud. It simply refused to bend for people who expected exceptions. I heard the final updates through people who still believed news traveled faster than healing. Megan called one Sunday afternoon. "It's official," she said. "Ryan moved out." I wasn't surprised. Victoria filed? No, he did. I looked across the water as the wind carried small waves toward the shoreline. "Why?" Megan laughed softly. "Apparently buying each other was easier than living with each other." I thanked her and wished her well before ending the call. That conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, yet it closed a chapter that had once consumed every waking thought. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope belonged to my father. Inside was a single page. No excuses, no requests, no attempts to rewrite history. Only one sentence stood alone in the center of the paper. "I should have protected both my daughters instead of choosing one." I read it twice before folding it carefully and placing it inside a drawer. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was the first honest thing he had ever given me. My mother never wrote. She called once, leaving a short voicemail saying she missed me. I believed she did. But missing someone and understanding why they left were two very different things. I didn't return the call. Not because I hated her, but because distance had finally become an act of self-respect instead of punishment. Daniel invited me to lunch after the divorce paperwork was complete. We sat at the same restaurant where we had celebrated winning an impossible corporate case years earlier. As always, he noticed details other people overlooked. "You seem lighter," he observed. I smiled. "I am. Because you won?" I considered the question carefully before shaking my head. "No. Because I stopped believing I had to compete." He raised his glass. "That's a much rarer victory." He was right. For most of my life, I thought I needed my family's approval to prove my worth. Every promotion, every financial achievement, every sacrifice had been another attempt to earn a place they had already decided belonged to someone else. The day I stopped asking for that place was the day I finally became free. Several months later, while cleaning old files from my laptop, I found the folder containing every screenshot, bank record, text message, and photograph connected to Ryan and Victoria. Thousands of files. A complete timeline of betrayal preserved with perfect accuracy. I opened the folder, looked through it one last time, and then permanently deleted everything. Not because it hadn't mattered. It had. Those records had helped me understand the truth when emotions tried to confuse it. But I no longer needed evidence to remind myself why I walked away. My life wasn't built around surviving them anymore. It was finally built around living for myself. Sometimes people ask whether I regret losing my husband to my own sister. They expect anger. They expect bitterness. They expect a story about revenge. Instead, I tell them something much simpler. My sister never took a happy marriage from me. She took a man willing to sell his loyalty for $75,500. She inherited parents' expectations that someone else would always rescue her. She inherited the consequences of believing appearances mattered more than responsibility. None of those things belong to me anymore. On the morning of my 37th birthday, I watched the sunrise paint the lake in shades of gold and silver. My phone remained quiet. No dramatic apologies. No desperate messages. No family emergencies waiting for me to solve them. Just peace. I finally understood that the greatest revenge had never been watching their marriage collapse 30 hours after it began. It was building a life so steady, so honest, and so free that their choices no longer had the power to disturb it. My sister believed she had paid $75,500 to buy my future. In the end, she had only purchased the privilege of keeping everything I had already chosen to leave behind. Nearly a year has passed since my sister believed $75,500 could purchase another woman's life. Time has a quiet way of revealing what anger never can. It strips away excuses until only character remains. Looking back, I no longer remember the exact amount sitting in Ryan's account. I remember the choices that surrounded it. Those were always worth far more than money. People often imagine justice as a dramatic courtroom victory or a perfectly timed confession. My experience was nothing like that. Justice arrived as ordinary mornings. It arrived in peaceful evenings where my phone remained silent. It arrived every time I made a decision without wondering how my family would react. Freedom wasn't a single moment. It became a habit. A few weeks ago, I attended a financial compliance conference downtown. During a networking reception, someone recognized my last name. "Are you related to Victoria Brooks?" he asked. For a brief second, the old version of me would have tensed, preparing to explain years of family history. Instead, I simply smiled. "She's my sister." He nodded politely before changing the subject to market regulations. That tiny exchange stayed with me all evening. For the first time in my life, my identity wasn't defined by my family's chaos. Their decisions belonged to them. Mine belonged to me. When I returned home that night, I found another envelope waiting in my mailbox. This one contained no letter, only my old wedding photograph. Someone had removed Ryan from the picture with careful scissors before mailing it anonymously. I stared at it for several minutes. Years earlier, I would have cried. Now I reached into a drawer, removed the photograph from its frame, and fed it into my paper shredder. Not because I hated the memory, because I no longer needed to preserve a version of my life that had stopped existing long ago. The following weekend, Megan invited me to dinner. Halfway through the meal, she smiled and asked, "Can I tell you something?" "Of course. I used to think you were the quiet one because you were weak." I laughed. "So did everyone else." She shook her head. "I understand now. You were quiet because you didn't need to prove anything." Her words reminded me of something Daniel had once said. Confidence rarely announces itself. Insecurity almost always does. Ryan needed admiration. Victoria needed victory. My parents needed the illusion that favoritism could never destroy a family. I needed none of those things anymore. Before we left the restaurant, Megan hesitated. "Do you ever think they'll change?" I considered the question carefully. "I hope they do. But I've stopped making my healing dependent on someone else's growth." She nodded slowly. "I think that's the healthiest thing I've ever heard." Driving home through downtown Chicago, I stopped at a red light overlooking the river. For years, I believed resilience meant enduring mistreatment without complaint. I was wrong. Real resilience meant recognizing the moment endurance became permission. Walking away wasn't giving up. It was refusing to negotiate with disrespect. That lesson cost me a marriage, a sister, and nearly my relationship with my parents. It also gave me something I had never possessed before. Peace that didn't require anyone else's approval. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Ryan had refused Victoria's money. Would our marriage have survived? Maybe, maybe not. But that question no longer controls me because it asks me to imagine a man who never truly existed. The man I married could have said no. The man my sister paid never intended to. Those were two different people. As I unlocked the door to my home, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the abandoned wife from a year earlier. She wasn't the overlooked daughter. She wasn't the sister constantly expected to sacrifice. She was simply Emily Carter. A woman who finally understood that self-respect is the only possession no one can buy, no family can steal, and no betrayal can ever take away. And that, more than any courtroom, contract, or bank statement, became the greatest inheritance I would ever receive. There is one question people still ask whenever they hear my story. It isn't about the money anymore. It isn't about Ryan or Victoria. They lean forward, lower their voices, and ask, "If you could go back, would you stop your sister before she made that decision?" My answer has never changed. No, because protecting someone from the consequences of their choices only delays the lesson they refuse to learn. About 18 months after everything fell apart, I received an invitation to a family reunion hosted by one of my cousins outside Chicago. At first, I had no intention of going. Then I realized something important. I wasn't avoiding my family anymore. I simply no longer organized my life around them. If I attended, it would be because I wanted to, not because guilt demanded it. The gathering was smaller than I remembered. Children played in the backyard while adults stood around folding tables sharing stories that grew more dramatic with every retelling. When I arrived, conversations paused for only a second before continuing. No whispers, no uncomfortable stares. Time had softened curiosity into ordinary familiarity. My aunt hugged me first. "It's good to see you, Emily. It's good to be here." There was no pity in her voice, only kindness. That alone felt unfamiliar. About an hour later, I noticed my father standing by himself near the garden fence. His shoulders looked smaller than I remembered. Age hadn't changed him nearly as much as regret had. He walked toward me slowly. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he admitted. "Neither was I." For a few moments we watched the children playing without saying anything. Finally, he spoke. "I owe you more than one apology." I looked at him but didn't interrupt. "I spent years believing I was keeping this family together." He smiled sadly. "What I was really doing was teaching one daughter that she never had to face consequences and teaching the other that love had to be earned." Those words settled quietly between us. For the first time, he wasn't defending the past. He was describing it honestly. "I can't change what happened," he continued. "I know. But I wanted you to hear me say that you deserved better." My eyes filled slightly, though I refused to let tears fall. Not because I was hiding emotion, because this moment wasn't about grief anymore. It was about acceptance. "Thank you," I said. He nodded once. Neither of us tried to repair 30 years in a single conversation. Some things heal slowly. Others simply stop hurting. That was enough. Later that afternoon, I saw Victoria across the yard. She looked thinner, quieter. The confidence that once filled every room had disappeared, replaced by something that resembled caution. She walked toward me with hesitant steps. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said before I could speak. I wasn't planning to discuss forgiveness. She looked down at her hands. "I was jealous of you." The confession surprised me. "You were. You always seemed stable." I almost laughed. "My life wasn't stable." "No," she whispered. "But you were." For years I had believed Victoria wanted everything I owned. Standing in front of her now, I realized she had wanted something much harder to obtain. Peace. The kind that couldn't be transferred through a bank account. The kind that couldn't be purchased by taking someone else's husband. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. This time I believed her. Not because the words erased the past, but because they weren't followed by excuses. No mention of stress. No blaming our parents. No request for help. Just responsibility. I nodded gently. "I hope you build a good life." "You too." Neither of us hugged. Neither of us pretended everything was fixed. Some relationships don't return to what they were. Sometimes the healthiest version is simply two people choosing not to harm each other anymore. As the sun began setting over the park, I walked back toward my car carrying nothing except my handbag and my keys. Years ago, I would have measured success by who apologized, who lost, or who won. Now I measured it differently. I could stand in the middle of the family that once defined my worth and feel no need to defend myself, explain myself, or prove myself. That was the moment I finally understood something money could never purchase. Healing isn't the reward you receive after justice. It is the decision you continue making long after justice has already been served. 2 years after my marriage ended, I stopped measuring my life by the day everything fell apart. For a long time, every milestone had been connected to that betrayal. Before the transfer, after the divorce, before Ryan left, after Victoria apologized. Somewhere along the way, I realized those moments belonged to my past, not my future. The realization came on an ordinary Tuesday. My company announced that I had been promoted to Director of Financial Compliance. When the email reached my inbox, dozens of congratulations followed within minutes. Colleagues stopped by my office. Clients called personally. Even Daniel sent a short message. "You earned every step." I smiled as I read it. Years earlier, I would have wanted to tell my parents first. I would have waited for their approval. I would have hoped they sounded proud. Instead, I turned off my phone, walked to the cafe across the street, and celebrated with a quiet lunch by myself. It wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. That evening, while organizing old storage boxes before moving into a larger condominium, I discovered a small wooden chest I had packed years earlier without opening. Inside were pieces of a life I barely recognized. Wedding invitations, holiday cards, old birthday gifts, a silver bracelet Ryan had given me during our second anniversary. At the very bottom rested a folded piece of paper. It was my own handwriting. A list titled 5-year plan. Buy a larger home. Start a family. Pay off every remaining loan. Travel through Europe. Grow old together. I smiled sadly. Not because those dreams had disappeared. Because I finally understood they had belonged to a version of my life built around someone else's promises. I folded the paper carefully. Then I turned it over and wrote a new list. Protect my peace. Keep learning. Travel because I choose to. Build relationships based on honesty. Never confuse love with sacrifice again. The second list was much shorter. It was also much stronger. A few days later, Daniel invited me to speak to a group of young financial professionals about ethics and accountability. Standing behind the podium, I looked across a room full of people just beginning their careers. I didn't tell them my family story. I didn't mention Ryan. I didn't mention $75,500. Instead, I ended my presentation with a sentence that had taken me years to understand. The most expensive mistakes are rarely financial. They're the moments when we ignore what we already know because we hope someone will become the person they have repeatedly shown us they are not. The room remained silent for several seconds before applause filled the auditorium. Afterward, a young woman approached me. "I needed to hear that," she said. "You have no idea how much." Maybe I didn't. Maybe I wasn't supposed to. Sometimes our greatest contribution isn't rescuing someone. It's giving them permission to trust themselves. That night, I walked home beneath the city lights feeling lighter than I ever had before. Not because my life had become perfect, because it had become honest. The following weekend, I received one final piece of unexpected news. Megan called laughing before I could even say hello. "You're going to appreciate this." "What happened?" "Someone asked Victoria if she'd ever marry again." I waited. Megan continued. She said, "Not until I find someone whose integrity can't be measured by a bank transfer." For a moment, I closed my eyes. That sentence told me more than anything else could have. My sister had finally learned the lesson money could never teach. Character cannot be purchased. Trust cannot be negotiated. Loyalty cannot be transferred between accounts. When the call ended, I stood beside my living room window watching the evening settle over Chicago. The skyline looked almost identical to the night my entire world had changed. The buildings were still there. The lights still reflected across the water. Only one thing was different. The woman standing at the window no longer feared losing everything. Because she had already discovered the one thing that mattered most had been inside her all along. No one could buy it. No one could betray it. And no one would ever convince her to give it away again. If someone had asked me years ago what $75,500 could buy, I would have answered with practical things. A new car, a down payment on a home, years of travel, a comfortable savings account. Now I know a different answer. It bought the truth. Not because money creates honesty, because it reveals it. Ryan revealed that his loyalty could be negotiated. Victoria revealed that she believed winning was more important than deserving. My parents revealed how easily love became conditional when favoritism had gone unchallenged for decades. And I revealed something to myself that I had spent most of my life forgetting. My value had never depended on being chosen by people who refused to see it. Last month, while walking along the lake before work, I passed a young couple arguing loudly on a park bench. The woman kept asking the same question. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" The man looked away without answering. I didn't stop walking. Years ago, that scene would have pulled me backward into memories I wanted to escape. Now it simply reminded me of something I already understood. Truth is rarely hidden. Most of the time, we simply don't want to accept what it is quietly showing us. As I continued along the path, the morning sun reflected across the water exactly as it had hundreds of times before. The city hadn't changed. Life hadn't become easier. Deadlines still existed. Unexpected problems still appeared. People still disappointed one another. The difference was no longer outside me. It was inside. I no longer confused peace with perfection. Peace came from knowing I would never abandon myself again just to keep someone else comfortable. Several days later, I donated my old wedding dress to an organization that redesigned formal gowns into clothing for children receiving hospice care. The volunteer thanked me warmly. "It's beautiful," she said. "It deserves another purpose." I smiled. So did I. Walking back to my car, I realized that sentence wasn't about the dress. For years, I believed betrayal had ruined my story. In reality, it had redirected it. Everything I once considered an ending had quietly become a beginning I was too frightened to imagine. I never remarried. Not because I stopped believing in love. Because I stopped believing love should require me to negotiate my dignity. If someone enters my life one day, they will walk beside me. Never ahead of me, never behind me, and never at the cost of who I am. As for my family, life continued. My father and I occasionally shared lunch every few months. The conversations were simple. Work, books, the weather. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive through dramatic speeches. Sometimes it arrives through ordinary afternoons where neither person pretends the past never happened. My relationship with my mother remained distant but respectful. She slowly learned that access to my life was no longer guaranteed simply because we shared the same blood. Victoria and I exchanged birthday messages each year. Nothing more, nothing less. We no longer tried to become the sisters we should have been. Instead, we became two adults who finally understood that respect begins where competition ends. Ryan disappeared from my life completely. That was neither victory nor punishment. It was simply the natural consequence of two strangers choosing separate roads. Sometimes people still recognize me from mutual friends and ask whether I hate any of them. I always answer the same way. No. Hatred requires energy, and I have far better places to invest mine. So if you've listened to my story hoping to discover how revenge feels, perhaps my answer will disappoint you. Revenge fades. Bitterness exhausts itself. Even justice eventually becomes another memory. But self-respect endures. It grows quietly every single day you refuse to betray yourself for the approval of people who have never learned how to value you. My sister believed she was buying my husband. She never realized she was paying the price that finally set me free. And if my story has taught me anything, it is this. The most valuable thing you will ever own cannot be inherited, stolen, manipulated, or purchased. It is the moment you look at your own reflection, recognize your worth without asking anyone else to confirm it, and finally understand that walking away from betrayal is never losing. Sometimes, it is the first honest step toward the life that was waiting for you all along.